3 black SUVs moved slowly through the crowded streets of Southside Chicago on a bitter November evening. In the middle car sat Salvatore Ferraro, a man whose name alone could silence an entire room. He wore a 3-piece suit cut to perfection, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist was worth more than most people's homes. He was on his way to close a deal that would give him control of the city's largest shipping port, a deal worth hundreds of millions. In the passenger seat, Frank Bellini, his lawyer, wouldn't stop talking about clauses and percentages. Sal wasn't listening. He was staring out the tinted window, watching the people on the sidewalk, people who had no idea what kind of man was passing them by. The traffic light turned red. The convoy stopped. That's when Sal saw her. An old woman was crossing the street between the cars. She was hunched over, her clothes torn and filthy, her bare feet swollen and cracked against the freezing pavement. She held out her trembling hands to every window she passed. She was begging. No one looked at her. Some drivers rolled up their windows. Sal watched her come closer. Then his heart stopped. That face. He knew that face. Even under the dirt, even beneath the deep wrinkles. He knew it. The woman reached his window and tapped on the bulletproof glass with weak, bony fingers. "Please, sir," she said. "Just a few coins. Anything at all." Her voice was rough and exhausted, barely above a whisper. Sal couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The woman outside his armored window was his mother, Margaret Ferraro, the same woman who'd brought him into this world 36 years ago. A car behind them honked. The light had turned green, but Sal sat frozen like stone. His mother shuffled away from his SUV to the next car. She didn't look back. She didn't recognize the armored vehicle. She didn't recognize her own son sitting inside, the son who'd left 18 years ago and never came back. Tommy turned around from the driver's seat. "Boss, you all right? You look like you just saw a ghost." Sal's hands were shaking. "Drive," he whispered. The SUV rolled forward. Sal twisted in his seat to look through the rear window. His mother was still there, dragging herself between the cars, her gray hair wild in the cold wind, her bare feet leaving faint marks on the wet asphalt. This couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. That couldn't be his mother. Because for 15 years, every single month, he'd sent money home. Thousands of dollars, wired through accounts his enemies could never trace. He'd bought her a house in the quiet suburbs, safe and warm, far from the violence of his world. His brother Gianni had sent photos, had sent messages confirming she was fine. So why was she on the street? If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button right now, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next, and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because what Sal discovered next about his own brother would shatter everything he believed about loyalty, family, and blood. Sal pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and dialed Gianni. The ring sounded once, twice, 3 times, 4. Finally, someone picked up. "What do you want?" Gianni's voice was flat and cold, without a trace of surprise, as if he'd been waiting for this call for a long time. Sal tried to speak, but his throat locked up. "Where's Mom?" he finally managed. Silence on the other end. Then Gianni laughed. Not a happy laugh, but something bitter, ugly, poisonous. "You suddenly care now?" Gianni said. "You left for 18 years. 18 years, Salvatore. You didn't come back once. Not once. You just sent money like money could replace you being there." Anger surged in Sal's chest. "I sent money so Mom could live comfortably," he said. "I bought her a house. A big house in the suburbs. Safe, quiet. Where is she, Gianni? Why isn't she in the house I bought?" Gianni laughed again, the sound drilling into Sal's ears like a blade. "That house? Oh, that house. I sold it. 3 years ago. Got a great price. $400,000. And the money you sent every month, $20,000 a month for 15 years, I spent it all. Every last dollar. Mom's right where she belongs. On the street. Begging. Just like she used to beg me to go find you. Just like she begged you to come home. But you never did." It felt like Sal had been punched straight in the gut. The air inside the car went thick. Tommy glanced up in the rearview mirror. Frank stopped shuffling papers. Both saw Sal's face change. "You sold Mom's house," Sal said slowly, each word heavy as stone. "You took her money. She's our mother, Gianni. How could you do that?" Gianni's voice exploded. "How could I do it? How could you do it is the real question. You abandoned us, Salvatore. You left when I was 12. 12. Do you know what that did to her? She cried every night. Every night for 18 years. She sat by the door waiting for you. And you never came. I was there. I saw it all. I watched her waste away because of you. And what were you doing? Building your empire. Becoming a boss. Sal clenched his teeth. I was trying to build a better life for all of us. Gianni spat out a harsh laugh. A better life? You think I don't know? You think I'm stupid enough not to know who you are? What you do out there? I know everything, Salvatore. I know you're a mafia boss. I know the money you send home is soaked in blood. Every dollar has a life on it. You kill people and send money to mom like that makes you a good son. At least when I took that money, it was cleaner than the way you earned it. The words stabbed straight through Sal, right into the deepest place he'd kept hidden, because Gianni was right. That money was blood money. Every dollar had a cost. And Sal had lied to himself for 15 years that sending money was enough. Where does mom sleep? Sal asked, his voice lower now, quieter, dangerous. Gianni was silent for a moment. I don't know, he said. Maybe the market. Maybe under a bridge. Maybe on the street. I haven't seen her in months. You haven't seen her? Sal said. She's your mother too, Gianni. Gianni's voice turned to ice. She stopped being my mother when she kept defending you. When she kept saying you were the good son. When she kept waiting for you to come back while I was standing right next to her every day. I got tired of watching her hope for nothing. The line went dead. Gianni hung up. Sal sat in the car, the phone still pressed to his ear, staring into nothing. His brother had stolen everything, left their mother on the street, and put it all on him. Tommy broke the silence. Boss, the port meeting. We're already late. The investors are waiting. If we don't go now, you'll lose the deal. Sal didn't answer. He kept staring ahead, but in his mind, there was only one image. His mother's bare, swollen feet on the freezing pavement. Frank Bellini turned to look at Sal. Boss, you can't do this. The port deal is 2 years of preparation. 2 years of negotiations. 2 years of grease. If you don't show up today, they'll take the deal to someone else. Do you understand? Hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions. Sal kept staring into nothing. Frank continued, his voice more urgent. I can call ahead and say you're 30 minutes late. They'll wait. They need you more than you need them. Just show up, sign, it's done. 15 minutes, and we're finished. Then you can do whatever you want. Sal slowly turned his head to look at Frank. His eyes were dead, empty, but his voice was steel. Cancel everything. Frank blinked. What? Sal spoke more slowly, every word clear. Cancel everything. Turn the car around. But boss, if I have to say it a third time, Sal said. Frank, this will be the last conversation we ever have. Frank shut his mouth. He knew that tone. He'd heard it before in rooms where people never walked out on their own feet. Tommy didn't need to hear more. He turned the car immediately. The convoy of 3 black SUVs made a U-turn in the middle of the street, the others following without a question. When Sal gave an order, people obeyed. They drove back to the street where Sal had last seen his mother. She wasn't there anymore. The traffic lights still blinked green and red, but the begging woman in the middle of the flow was gone. Sal ordered a search. Tommy made calls. 4 cars split in 4 directions. They drove through every street, every alley, every dark corner of Bridgeport. Sal rolled the window down, his eyes scanning every face on the sidewalk. Every elderly woman made his heart jolt, but it wasn't her. Not his mother. 30 minutes passed. 45. An hour. Sal's phone kept ringing. Frank. Investors. Partners. He shut it off. Tommy drove past the old market near the highway. Sal looked left and saw the overpass. Under it were stacked cardboard sheets, a broken shopping cart, and 2 figures. Stop, Sal said. Tommy pulled over. Sal looked closer. One of the figures was an old woman. Messy silver hair, a small body curled inside a thin coat. She sat against a concrete pillar, her head slumped forward. Beside her was a young woman. She sat close, one arm around the old woman's shoulders, the other breaking half a loaf of bread and lifting it to her mouth. The girl pulled a torn, thin blanket over the old woman, while she herself wore only a worn jacket against the early November cold. Sal opened the car door and stepped out. His expensive leather shoes hit dirty pavement. Tommy stepped out too, a hand inside his jacket where the gun was. 2 bodyguards from the front and rear cars joined them. 5 men in black suits walked toward the underpass. The young woman heard the footsteps. She looked up. When she saw the men in suits approaching, she reacted instantly. She jumped up and stepped in front of the old woman. Fists clenched, shoulders squared, eyes fierce. She was thin, hair tangled, clothes filthy with road dust, her face pale from hunger and cold. But she stood there like a wall. She didn't shake. She didn't back away. "Don't come closer to her," she said. Her voice trembled but stayed hard, like rusted steel that still cuts. "I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are. But if you touch her, I'll fight you." Tommy took a step forward, his hand still inside his jacket. Sal raised a hand to stop him. Sal looked at the girl, thin, ragged, starving, but her eyes burned with protection. There was something familiar in them, in the way she stood, in the way she was ready to fight 5 men to protect an old woman. Sal didn't recognize it yet, but he felt it. Something tugged inside his chest, vague and distant, like a memory from another life. He took one more step toward them. Sal stepped past the girl. She raised an arm to block him, but Sal didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed only on the old woman slumped against the concrete pillar behind her. He stopped a few steps away. His mouth was dry. Then he spoke. "Mama," one single word, soft as breath. Yet it echoed beneath the overpass. The young woman froze. Tommy and the 2 bodyguards stood still. The old woman didn't react. Her head was still bowed, half a loaf of bread hanging loosely in her hand. Sal took another step. "Mama," he said again, louder. The old woman slowly lifted her head. Her cloudy eyes narrowed in the weak light filtering under the bridge. She looked at the man in front of her, the expensive suit, the polished shoes smeared with dust, the hard face, but eyes trembling. She stared for a long moment, then her mouth opened. "Salvatore," she said, "is that you? Or am I dreaming again?" Her voice was hoarse, breaking at the end. She'd dreamed this dream too many times. Too many nights she'd seen her eldest son walk toward her, only to wake on freezing pavement with empty hands. "I'm here, Mama," Sal said. "I came back." Margaret's eyes widened. She looked at him as if seeing the dead rise. Then slowly she tried to stand. Her legs shook, her knees buckled. Sal rushed forward to catch her, but the instant his hand touched her arm, she recoiled, and she slapped him. That small, gaunt hand struck Sal's face with a force no one would believe a malnourished 63-year-old woman could have. The sound cracked under the bridge. Tommy's hand snapped inside his jacket by instinct, fingers brushing the gun grip. Sal raised his left hand behind him without turning, palm open, signaling stop. Tommy released his grip. The young woman stepped back, eyes wide at the scene. Sal stood there. His right hand stayed on his cheek. He didn't dodge. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. "You abandoned me," Margaret said. Her voice trembled, but every word cut like a blade. "You left and you never came back. I waited for you, Salvatore. I waited every day, every week, every month, every year. 18 years. Do you know how long 18 years is when you're waiting alone?" She struck him again, the other cheek. Sal still didn't move. "I sat by the door every night," she said, tears starting to stream down her wrinkled face. "I heard footsteps outside and thought it was you. Every knock made my heart race because I thought you'd come home. But it was never you. Never. You became rich, didn't you? You wear fine clothes, ride in luxury cars, have people serving you. And what about me? I begged on the streets. I slept under bridges. I asked strangers for spare change. Do you know what that feels like? To beg strangers while your son lives like a king?" Sal dropped to his knees. Both knees hit the filthy ground, his $1,000 suit smeared with dirt and trash. He didn't care. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice broke. No one in his underworld empire had ever heard this voice. Not the boss's voice. Not a killer's voice. This was the voice of a son who'd abandoned his mother and knew he was wrong. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry." Margaret looked down at her son kneeling in the dirt. Her tears didn't stop, but her voice hardened. "Sorry?" she said. "Sorry doesn't give me back 18 years of my life, Salvatore. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I was too hungry to sleep. Sorry didn't keep me warm when I curled up in the freezing cold. You left. You sent money. You thought that was enough. But I didn't need money. I needed you. I needed to see your face, to hear your voice, to know you were alive, And you didn't give me that. You sent money and vanished like I was a bill you paid every month." Sal bowed his head. Tears fell onto the dusty ground. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago was kneeling under a bridge, crying in front of his mother, in front of a stranger, in front of his men. And he didn't care, because she was right. Every word she spoke was right. He'd treated her like an expense line. Send money, check it off, move on with his life. He'd called that devotion. But it was just cowardice dressed up as responsibility. The young woman stood behind, her body still angled protectively toward the old woman, even though it wasn't needed anymore. She watched the man kneeling in the dirt and the old woman standing before him. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she saw the tears, and she saw the pain, real pain that couldn't be faked. Sal stayed on his knees. He looked up at his mother, his eyes bloodshot. "Mama," he said, "I sent money every month. For 15 years. $20,000 a month. I bought you a house in the suburbs. A big house, with a garden, quiet, safe. I sent everything through Gianni." Margaret stared at him. Her face changed. The anger vanished, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, then horror. "What house?" she said. Her voice shook. "What money, Salvatore? I never received any house. I never received a single dollar. There was no house, no money, nothing at all." Cold flooded Sal's body. Not the cold of November air, but a deeper cold, sinking into his bones. "Gianni," he said. "Gianni took everything." Margaret looked at him as if she didn't understand. Then the meaning seeped in, slowly, drop by drop, like poison into blood. "Gianni took everything?" she repeated. "My son? Gianni? My Gianni?" Sal nodded. "He told me on the phone. He sold the house. He spent all the money I sent. He left you on the street." Margaret's legs gave out, not gradually, but collapsing at once, like a building with its foundation pulled away. Sal lunged forward and caught her. She was so light it startled him. Light as if there was nothing left inside her, as if she hadn't eaten properly in years. He held her, feeling every bone through her thin clothes. "Not both of them," she whispered, her voice breaking apart. "Not both my sons. First you left. Now Gianni betrayed me. What did I do wrong? Where did I fail that both my sons treated me like this?" Sal held her tighter. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mama. This is my fault. I should have come back. I should have checked myself. I thought money was enough. But I was wrong." Margaret cried, not loudly. She'd cried too much in her life to have strength for that. She just trembled in Sal's arms, tears falling silently, her narrow shoulders shaking in small spasms. The young woman behind them saw everything. She watched Maggie, the woman who'd shared every scrap of bread with her for months, crying in the arms of a stranger in an expensive suit. Maggie had talked about her eldest son so often, never using his full name, only calling him the son who went far away. She spoke of him every night under the bridge. "He's smart. He's strong. He left when he was young. But I know he remembers me. I know he'll come back." The girl looked at the man holding Maggie. The hard face, the square jaw, the dark eyes. Something was familiar. Not from Maggie's stories. From somewhere deeper, older, buried in a part of memory she'd sealed shut. Then it hit her, not slowly, but like lightning. A winter night 18 years ago. She was 9. Her father was drunk. A bottle smashed against the wall near her head. She curled into the corner of the kitchen, arms over her head. Her father lunged. Then someone stepped in front of her, an 18-year-old boy from next door. He shoved her father away. Her father fell. The boy scooped her up and ran. She remembered his arms around her, strong but careful. She remembered him setting her down on Maggie's porch. She remembered dark eyes, stern but gentle, looking down at her. And she remembered his last words. "Stay here. She'll keep you safe. I have to go." Then he was gone. Forever, until now. The girl looked at the man again. Dark eyes, the same eyes, 18 years older, harder, colder, but the same eyes. "Sal?" she whispered. Just one word, so soft the wind could have carried it away. But Sal heard it. He turned. He looked at her. Really looked. Past the dirt, the gaunt face, the years of hardship, those eyes, the neighbor's child, the little girl he'd carried out of a drunk man's house on a winter night, the child he'd set on his mother's porch and left behind. "Thea?" he said. Time stopped. The wind went still. Under the filthy bridge in Bridgeport, Chicago. 3 people from the past stared at one another. A mafia boss, an abandoned mother, and an orphaned child grown into a homeless woman. 18 years ago, they'd lived side by side. 18 years later, life had dragged them back to the same place, under a bridge, with nothing in their hands. Sal stood up and lifted his mother into his arms. She was so light it made him want to scream, lighter than a child. He walked toward the car as Tommy rushed ahead to open the rear door, but Margaret clutched Sal's jacket and looked back over his shoulder. "The girl," she said, her voice weak but firm. "If she doesn't come with us, I'm not going." Sal turned. Thea was still standing under the bridge, her arms hanging at her sides, her eyes fixed on them with an expression Sal couldn't quite read. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was the look of someone who was used to watching people leave, as if she'd already accepted this moment. The moment Maggie would be taken away and she'd be left behind alone again. Sal nodded toward her. "Get in the car, Thea." She didn't move. "I don't need anyone's charity," she said. "Maggie's safe now. I can take care of myself." Margaret reached out toward her. "Maggie," she said, using the name they'd called each other on the streets. "My girl, come here. I'm not going without you. Don't leave me now." Thea looked at her, her jaw tightening. Then she stepped forward, not because of Sal, but because of Maggie. She got into the car and sat beside her, taking her hand, not looking at Sal, not looking at Tommy, not looking at the armored SUV's leather interior that was probably worth more than everything she'd ever owned combined. Tommy drove as the 3 black SUVs left Bridgeport, passing trash-strewn streets, crumbling red brick buildings, intersections where half the streetlights were broken. Then the scenery began to change. Wider roads, cleaner sidewalks, more trees, taller, grander buildings. From Bridgeport to River North was only 15 minutes, but it felt like crossing between worlds. Margaret sat quietly, staring out the window, tears still streaking her dirty face, not bothering to wipe them away, watching brightly lit storefronts, elegant restaurants, people in fine coats stepping out of gleaming cars. She'd lived 15 minutes from this world her whole life and had never touched it. Thea watched too, her gaze sharp and wary, memorizing turns and streets, the survival instinct of someone who'd lived outside, always knowing an exit, always knowing how to get back to where she belonged. The car stopped at the estate gates, black iron swinging open as security cameras tracked their arrival. Margaret gasped when the white 3-story mansion appeared beyond the trees. A marble fountain in the courtyard, manicured gardens, warm golden light glowing from wide windows. "You live here?" she whispered. Sal nodded, saying nothing, because watching his mother's swollen bare feet step onto the stone driveway of that mansion filled him with a shame so deep it made him nauseous. All this luxury, the fountain, the gardens, millions poured into this place while his mother slept under a bridge, begged on the streets, split a loaf of bread with a homeless girl because it was all she had. He carried her inside and called for the house staff. A middle-aged woman named Mrs. Coleman hurried over, and when she saw the 2 ragged, filthy women standing on the marble floor, a flicker of disdain crossed her eyes. Sal noticed. "This is my mother," he said calmly, his voice so cold the room seemed to freeze. "Prepare the best guest room. Draw a hot bath. Find clean clothes. Call Dr. Patterson immediately. I want her fully examined. And prepare food. Good food, whatever she wants." Mrs. Coleman nodded quickly, but Sal wasn't finished. He stepped closer and lowered his voice, so only she could hear. "And if anyone in this house looks at my mother or my guests the way you just did, that person will never walk out of here again. Do you understand me?" Mrs. Coleman went pale. She understood, as did everyone who worked in this house. "Yes, sir," she said before hurrying away. Sal turned to Thea, who stood in the corner with her back to the wall, eyes scanning the high ceiling, crystal chandelier, spiral staircase, oil paintings, as if she were in a museum instead of a home. "Your room is next to my mother's," Sal said. Thea looked at him. "I'm not staying long," she said. "When Maggie's better, I'll leave." Sal didn't argue. He just nodded and turned away. Mrs. Coleman led Margaret upstairs, while another staff member guided Thea to the adjoining room. It was larger than any place Thea had ever lived. A big white bed, heavy curtains, soft carpet, a private marble bathroom. The attendant turned on the hot water and left. Thea stood alone in the bathroom as steam fogged the mirror. She caught a glimpse of herself before it disappeared. The gaunt face, hollow eyes, sharp cheekbones, the faint scar on her forehead from a robbery last year, tangled, filthy hair. She barely recognized herself. She stepped into the tub and flinched as the hot water hit her skin, then slowly sat down, letting the heat soak through grime, wounds, and years of the street clinging to her body. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a hot bath. Maybe 3 years, maybe longer. She sat there until the water nearly burned, eyes closed, unwilling to leave. And for the first time in a very long while, she felt warm. An hour later, Thea came downstairs wearing the clean clothes the staff had laid out on the bed. Soft fabric pants and a white shirt, both a few sizes too big. Her hair still wet and slicked back, her face fully visible for the first time, the sharp jawline, high cheekbones, the faint scar on her forehead, thin but not fragile. She moved through the hallway without making a sound, the habit of someone used to living in the shadows, and found Sal in the first-floor study, slumped behind the large wooden desk with his head buried in his hands. She knocked lightly on the doorframe and Sal looked up. Thea stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Didn't sit, just stood in front of his desk with her arms crossed. "You want to know what happened to Maggie?" she said. Not a question, but a statement. "Then tell me," Sal said. Thea met his eyes. "I found her 8 months ago," she said, "in an alley behind Maxwell Street Market, behind a dumpster. She was curled up on the ground, nearly unconscious, her lips blue, her skin cold as stone. She didn't respond when I shook her. I thought she was dead." She paused. "I dragged her into a spot out of the wind, covered her with every piece of clothing I had, and held her until she warmed up. She woke up near dawn. The first thing she said was sorry, apologizing for bothering me." Sal's grip tightened on the chair. Thea continued. "Before she met me, she'd been robbed twice. The first time they took the shoes she'd found in the trash. The second time they snatched the plastic bag holding the coins she'd begged for all day. They shoved her to the ground. She lay on the sidewalk all night because she couldn't get back up. No one stopped. No one helped." Sal said nothing. His jaw clenched so hard the muscle twitched. "Last winter," Thea went on, "the temperature dropped to -15. All the shelters were full. She and I slept in the subway station, but got kicked out at midnight. She almost froze to death that night. I found a ventilation grate from a building basement, just warm enough to keep us alive. We lay on it until morning. She ran a fever for 3 days after that. I didn't have money for medicine. I stole a box of Tylenol from the drugstore on the corner. That was the only time I ever stole." She hesitated, then continued. "I went hungry so she could eat. If I found a loaf of bread, she ate first. If there was only enough for one, she ate. Not because I'm noble, but because she was old. She couldn't endure hunger the way I could, and because she was the only person in this world who cared whether I lived or died. Once 3 drunk guys came to where we slept at 2 in the morning. They wanted the spot. I fought all 3. I broke 2 ribs, but they left, and Maggie wasn't touched." Sal looked at her, the 27-year-old woman standing in front of him, thin, scarred, ribs once broken protecting his mother. She'd done what he hadn't. She'd stayed, gone hungry, fought, nearly frozen, all for an old woman who wasn't her blood. "Why?" Sal asked. "Why did you do all that for her?" Thea was quiet for a moment, then spoke more softly. "Because she looked at me. People walk past the homeless like they're trash. No one looks, no one sees. But Maggie looked at me. She saw me. She talked to me. She asked my name. She asked if I was hungry. She was the only person in years who looked at me and saw a human being. Not garbage, not a ghost. A human being. She turned away. You know enough. She left the room." Sal sat alone, staring at his hands. Hands that had killed, signed contracts, counted millions, but had never lifted his mother out of the cold. There was a knock and Dr. Patterson came in, Sal's private physician for years. The only man who'd patched wounds Sal couldn't take to a hospital, and he'd just examined Margaret. His face was grave. "Mr. Ferraro," he said, "your mother is very weak. Severe malnutrition. Infections in both feet with a risk of gangrene if not treated quickly. Dangerously high blood pressure. Untreated diabetes. And signs of early-stage heart failure. How long has she been living on the street?" Sal clenched his teeth. "I don't know. Maybe months, maybe years." Dr. Patterson shook his head. She needs constant care, medication, nutrition, rest. I'll write detailed prescriptions, but you should know some of the damage may be permanent." The doctor left. Sal sat for a moment, then picked up his phone and called Tommy. "Tommy," he said, "I need you to do something. Investigate Gianni, everything. Bank accounts, transactions, assets, every dollar he's spent in 15 years. I want results within 24 hours. Understood, boss." And Tommy, triple security at the estate. More guards at the gate, more cameras, more patrols. No one knows my mother is here. No one. If any enemy finds out, she becomes a target. Tommy understood, better than anyone, because in Sal's world, family was a fatal weakness, and that weakness was now lying in a bed on the second floor. Tommy returned the next morning, exactly 24 hours after Sal had demanded, carrying a black leather briefcase with a thick stack of files inside, which he set on Sal's desk, opened, and began speaking, telling him it was all worse than the boss had imagined. Sal looked down at the folder as Tommy explained he'd used the entire network of the empire to trace everything. Bank accounts, real estate transactions, gambling records, receipts, everything. "The house you bought for Margaret in the Naperville suburbs," Tommy said. "Gianni sold it 3 years ago, through a brokerage in Oak Brook, for $400,000. The money went straight into his personal account. Not a single dollar ever reached Margaret." Sal turned the page as Tommy continued. "The monthly money you sent, $20,000 a month for 15 years, a total of $3,600,000. I tracked almost all of it. About $1.2 million went into casinos. Rivers Casino in Des Plaines, Horseshoe in Hammond. He was a regular, lost more than he won. About $800,000 went into alcohol, restaurants, bars, women. He lived like a spoiled prince for 15 years. The rest went into the Wicker Park apartment, furniture, cars, clothes. He bought a BMW 3 years ago, already sold it." Sal turned another page, his jaw tightening with every sheet, but Tommy wasn't finished. "The worst part is here," Tommy said, pulling out a stack of printed pages. "These are copies of the text messages Gianni sent you over 15 years. I cross-checked with Margaret's real number. Margaret doesn't have a phone, hasn't had one for at least 5 years. The number Gianni gave you, said was hers, was actually a prepaid phone he bought himself. He texted you pretending to be Margaret for 15 years. Sal stared at the messages, recognizing them, having read them hundreds of times. "Mama's fine. The house is beautiful. Mama wishes you'd come home but understands you're busy. Take care of your health, my son. Mama loves you." Every message was Gianni, not his mother, not a single word from her. For 15 years he'd believed he was talking to his mother when he was talking to the man stealing from her. "And there's more," Tommy said, laying down a stack of photos. "The pictures Gianni sent you every year. Margaret in the Naperville house, sitting in the garden, standing at the door, smiling on the sofa. I checked them. That isn't Margaret." Sal looked up. "What?" Tommy pointed at the photos. "Gianni hired an Italian elderly woman who resembled Margaret to pose in the house before he sold it. He took dozens of photos at once, then sent them to you over the years. Every holiday, every birthday, every Christmas. The same woman, the same house, sent at different times to look new." Sal looked back at the photos, the images that had reassured him for years, that his mother was fine, healthy, safe. He'd built an entire underground empire on suspicion, trusted no one, not partners, not police, not politicians. Checked everything twice, 3 times, uncovered betrayals before they formed, but he'd never checked Gianni. Because Gianni was family, and Sal didn't doubt family. That was his only blind spot, and Gianni knew it, exploited it for 15 years. Sal slowly stood, looked at the folder on the desk, then grabbed the edge of the massive oak table and flipped it over, the table crashing to the floor, papers flying, the glass shattering, the desk lamp exploding on the stone floor. Tommy didn't move. He'd seen Sal angry many times, but never like this. This wasn't the rage of a boss betrayed in a deal. This was the rage of a son who'd learned his brother had pushed their mother onto the street and lied for 15 years that she was fine. Sal stood amid the wreckage, breathing hard, his fists clenched so tightly, his nails cut into his palms and blood seeped out. He looked at Tommy. "Get the car ready," he said. "We're going to see Gianni. Now." 2 black SUVs stopped in front of an apartment building in Wicker Park, a trendy neighborhood of upscale restaurants, expensive cafes, and tree-lined streets. Sal stepped out of the vehicle. Tommy followed, 2 bodyguards close behind. They entered the lobby, took the elevator to the 5th floor, apartment 512. Sal knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Shuffling footsteps sounded inside. The door opened. Gianni stood there, hair messy, eyes sunken, beard unshaven for days, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and pajama pants. But behind him was the apartment Sal noticed instantly. Polished hardwood floors, a cream leather sofa, a large flat screen mounted on the wall, a walnut liquor shelf lined with bottles, a granite kitchen island, art on the walls, designer lighting, everything clean, elegant, warm. Gianni saw Sal and went pale. He stepped back. He saw Tommy and the bodyguards and stepped back again. Sal walked in without waiting to be invited. He moved slowly through the living room, his hand brushing the leather sofa. He picked up a bottle from the shelf and read the label. Barolo. $200 a bottle. He set it down. He opened the refrigerator. It was full. Imported cheeses, Italian cold cuts, fresh fruit. He closed it. He stepped into the bedroom. A double bed with white sheets, a soft mattress. The closet stood open, packed with coats, shoes, designer clothes. He returned to the living room. Gianni was pressed into the corner, eyes flicking to Tommy blocking the door. Sal stopped in front of him and spoke slowly. $200 Barolo. A $5,000 leather sofa. $4,000 a month rent. Designer clothes. A fridge full of good food. He looked straight into Gianni's eyes. And mother begs on the street. Mother sleeps under a bridge. Mother nearly froze to death last winter. Mother was robbed twice. Mother had no shoes to wear. Her feet are swollen and infected, while you drink $200 wine. Gianni opened his mouth. Listen to me. Sal grabbed his collar, lifted him, and slammed him into the wall. Gianni's back hit the drywall, leaving a dent. He choked. Tommy stepped forward, then stopped. The boss didn't need help. Sal leaned in close, his voice cold as steel. I've got all the evidence. Every dollar you spent, every time you gambled, every fake message, every staged photo. You hired someone to pretend to be mother to lie to me. 15 years, Gianni. 15 years you looked me in the eye through a phone and lied. Gianni tried to speak, but Sal tightened his grip. Now you listen to me, Sal said. You sell this apartment. You sell everything you own. Every chair, every bottle, every pair of shoes, and you give it back to mother. You know it won't be enough. It'll never be enough. But you'll do it. Or, Sal paused, or I'll deal with you the way I deal with traitors. And you know how I deal with them. Sal released him. Gianni slid down the wall and collapsed onto the gleaming wooden floor of the luxury apartment bought with stolen money. And Gianni cried. Not quietly. He broke apart, like a dam giving way. Tears, snot, choking sobs. He curled on the floor, hands clutching his head. I can't sleep, he said through the sobbing. 3 years. I haven't slept a full night in 3 years. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. Every night I hear her asking why. I drink to forget, but I don't. I gamble to stop thinking, but I still think. I know I'm trash. I know. I don't deserve to live. And I'm not asking for mercy. If you want to kill me, do it. Maybe that's the best thing you could do for me. Sal looked down at his brother, curled up, broken, pathetic. The Mafia boss had seen many enemies kneel and beg for their lives, but nothing had ever hurt like this, because this was his brother, the 12-year-old boy he'd left behind 18 years ago. Sal was silent for a long moment. Then he said something even he hadn't expected to say. Mother still loves you. Gianni stopped crying. He looked up, eyes red, face soaked, as if Sal had spoken another language. What? He whispered. Mother still loves you, Sal said again. After everything you've done, after you stole everything, after you pushed her onto the street, she still calls you her son. She made me promise not to kill you. I don't understand it, but it's true. Gianni dropped his face to the floor. His whole body shook. He cried like he'd never been allowed to cry. Like the 12-year-old boy his brother had left behind 18 years ago. Sal walked to the door. Sell it all, he said without turning back. Give it to mother. Then contact me. He walked out. Tommy and the bodyguards followed. The door closed. Gianni lay alone on the floor of his luxury apartment, crying until there were no tears left. That night, Sal didn't sleep. He sat in the armchair beside his mother's bed. The room was quiet, broken only by the steady beep of the blood pressure monitor every few seconds. Dr. Patterson had installed the monitoring equipment at her bedside. Margaret lay on the large bed, the white blanket pulled up to her chest, silver hair spread across the pillow. She looked small in the wide room, small and fragile enough that Sal felt if he looked away she might disappear. She opened her eyes, looked around for a moment, confused, as if she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw Sal and remembered. "Aren't you sleeping?" she asked softly. Sal shook his head. "I can't sleep, Mama." Margaret turned to face him. Even in the dark, her eyes were bright, sharp, still the eyes of a mother who could see straight through her son. "Why did you leave, Salvatore?" she asked. "That's all I want to know. Why did you go and never come back?" Sal took a deep breath and looked down at his hands in the darkness. Then he began. "I was 18, Mama. Father had been gone 2 years. We had nothing. You worked 2 shifts at the laundry and it still wasn't enough to pay the rent. Gianni needed school. You needed medicine for your back. I couldn't stand watching you suffer anymore, so I left. I thought I'd make money and come back." Margaret listened without interrupting. Sal continued, "But the city wasn't what I imagined. I slept on the street. I ate from trash bins. I did every job no one else wanted. Then one night, I met a man named Carmine. He needed a runner. Deliveries. Messages. I didn't ask what I was delivering or what messages I was carrying. I just needed the money. That's how I stepped in." Sal paused and looked at her. She stayed silent, her eyes never leaving his. "A year later, I understood where I was. I knew who these people were and what they did. But by then I was too deep. There was no way out. Either I kept climbing or I died. I chose to live. I learned fast. I did things I can't tell you about. I climbed, step by step, year by year, until there was no one above me. Why didn't you come back?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just sad. Sad all the way to the bone. "Because I was afraid, Mama," Sal said, admitting it for the first time to anyone. "In my world, family is a weakness. Enemies go after family. They threaten them, kidnap them, kill them. I kept my distance because I thought that was how I protected you. If no one knew where you were, no one could touch you. I sent money through Gianni so no one could trace a line back to you. I didn't come back because I was afraid someone would follow me and find you." He stopped. "But I was wrong. I thought distance would protect you, but distance was what almost killed you." Margaret was silent for a long time. The steady beep of the monitor filled the space between them. Then she asked the question Sal had known was coming and still feared. "What is my son, Salvatore? What kind of man are you out there?" Sal looked at her. He could have lied. He'd lied to the world for 18 years, but he couldn't lie to those eyes. "I'm a bad man, Mama." His voice was so quiet it was almost inaudible. "I do bad things. I hurt people. I cause suffering. I do things that if you knew, you wouldn't want to look at me again." Margaret looked at her son. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't turn away. She reached out and took Sal's hand, her small, thin fingers wrapping around his large, rough one. "I'm not asking what you do," she said. "I'm asking who you are. And you're my son. Whatever you are out there, whatever you do, you're still the baby I held in my arms the day you were born. That doesn't change. It never changes. I still love you." Sal bowed his head until his forehead rested against her hand, and he cried. Not like a boss losing a deal. Not like a powerful man under pressure. He cried like the 18-year-old son who'd left home and carried guilt for half his life. His shoulders shook, tears soaking into the white sheets. For 18 years he hadn't cried. For 18 years he'd swallowed everything, built walls around himself, turned to stone, and now those walls collapsed. Margaret placed her other hand on his head and stroked it gently, like she had when he was small. They sat like that in the dark. Then she spoke again. "Promise me one thing." Sal lifted his head, eyes red. "Mama, don't kill Gianni." Sal clenched his jaw. "Mama, after everything he did to you, he's your brother," she said, her voice quiet but hard as iron. "He's my son, just like you. Promise me, Salvatore. Promise me you won't kill your brother." Everything in Sal screamed to refuse, but her eyes held him. Eyes that had waited 18 years for him. Eyes that had cried every night because of him. He couldn't say no. "I promise," he said. "I won't kill him. But he has to return everything he took." Margaret nodded, then closed her eyes, her hand still holding Sal's. A few minutes later, she fell asleep. Sal stayed there, holding his mother's hand, watching her breathe, and he wondered how a woman betrayed by both her sons could still love them both. 4 a.m. The mansion was silent. Security staff patrolled the garden, their footsteps light on the gravel. Cameras rotated slowly along the walls. Thea lay on the bed in the guest room, larger than every place she'd ever slept combined. The sheets were soft, the pillows thick, the blanket warm, and she couldn't sleep. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, counting seconds. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to shut down. It was too quiet. On the street there was always noise. Cars passing, people shouting, dogs barking, wind slipping through cracks. She'd slept with noise for years. This silence made her feel like she couldn't breathe, and the bed was too soft. Her back was used to concrete, cardboard, bare ground. The mattress made her feel like she was sinking, like the ground beneath her wasn't real. She got up, slipped on a thin jacket, and went barefoot downstairs. She crossed the living room and opened the glass door to the backyard. The garden was wide, trees neatly trimmed, a small fountain murmuring in the far corner. She sat on the stone steps, pulled her knees to her chest, and wrapped her arms around her legs. The November cold pressed against her skin. She inhaled deeply. Cold air felt more familiar than soft sheets. She'd been sitting there about 15 minutes when she heard the door open behind her, heavy footsteps trying to be quiet. She didn't turn around. She knew who it was. Sal sat down on the step beside her. He didn't say anything. He held a coat in his hands. His coat, thick, heavy, expensive, smelling of leather and cologne. He draped it over her shoulders. Thea didn't push it away and didn't say thank you. She stared into the darkness ahead. They sat in silence. A minute, 2 minutes. Then Thea spoke. "You're Mafia, right?" It wasn't a question, more a statement. She didn't look at him when she said it. Sal was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Yes." Thea nodded slightly, as if she'd known all along and only needed him to confirm it. She'd seen enough. The armored SUVs, armed bodyguards, the way Tommy called him boss. The fear in Mrs. Coleman's eyes when he spoke. The way the entire house functioned like a fortress. She didn't need an explanation. "Have you killed people?" she asked. Sal looked out into the garden. She didn't want to hear the answer. Thea turned to look at him for the first time. Light from the glass door fell across half his face, half in shadow. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I've lived on the street long enough to not be afraid of anything. I fought 3 drunk men to protect Maggie. I've slept in alleys where one wrong step could be your last. I'm not afraid of you." She paused. "But I'm afraid for Maggie. She's in the house of a mafia boss. If your enemies find out she's here, what happens to her? She's suffered enough. She doesn't deserve any more." Sal looked at her. "I'll protect her," he said. "With my life. And I'll protect you too, Thea. No one will touch my mother or you while you're in this house. I swear." Thea looked at him. Her eyes didn't soften or warm. She looked at him with the gaze of someone who'd been broken by too many broken promises to believe in oaths anymore. "The last time you said you'd protect me," she said slowly, "you disappeared for 18 years. The words struck Sal deeper than any bullet he'd ever taken, deeper than his mother's slap beneath the bridge, because she was right. 18 years ago, he'd set a 9-year-old girl down on his mother's porch and said, "Stay here. You'll be safe." Then he left, and that child grew up alone, went into foster care alone, ended up on the street alone, starved alone, got beaten alone, for 18 years. He hadn't kept his promise to his mother or to the neighbor's child. What had he kept? Sal didn't answer because there was nothing to answer. She was right, and he knew it. They sat on the stone steps, an arm's length apart but separated by 18 years. Neither spoke again. Cold wind moved through the garden. The fountain whispered. A guard passed in the distance, a dark shape sliding behind the fence. Thea pulled Sal's coat tighter around her shoulders, not because she accepted him, but because it was cold. That was all. They sat there until the sky shifted from black to gray, from gray to pale violet, then from violet to orange. Dawn rose over Chicago. No one spoke another word, and no one stood up and walked away. 3 days later, Sal's phone rang. "Gianni." Sal looked at the screen, then answered without speaking. Gianni spoke first. I want to see Mama. His voice was hoarse, exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept or eaten in days. Sal wanted to hang up, wanted to say no, wanted to say you lost the right to see her the moment you put her on the street. But he remembered his promise to his mother, and he remembered her eyes when she said he was still her son. I'll ask her, Sal said. It's her decision, not mine. He hung up and went upstairs. Margaret was sitting on the bed, Thea beside her, cutting an apple into small pieces and feeding her. Color had returned to her face after 3 days of food and rest. But her eyes were still sad, the kind of sadness that food and soft beds can't fix. Mama, Sal said from the doorway. Gianni wants to see you. Margaret's hand holding the apple slice stopped midair. Thea looked up at Sal, her eyes hardening. Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she said, Let him come. Mama, Sal said, you don't owe him anything. You can say no. She shook her head. I lost 18 years with you, she said. I don't want to lose more time with the other one, no matter what he's done. No matter how he betrayed me. He's still my son. I need to hear from his own mouth why he did it. Sal nodded and texted Gianni. Tomorrow, 10 in the morning. Come alone. The next day, Gianni arrived. He looked worse than he had at the Wicker Park apartment. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes sunken with dark circles, his cheeks hollow, visibly thinner after only a few days. He stood at the gate staring up at the massive house with empty eyes. Tommy led him inside. Sal waited at the front door. She's in the garden, he said, his voice cold, not hateful but not warm. If you make her cry, Sal said quietly so only Gianni could hear, I'll forget the promise I made to her. Do you understand? Gianni nodded and walked through the living room, down the hall, and out the glass door to the backyard. Margaret was sitting on a wooden chair beneath the maple tree. Thea stood behind her, her back against the trunk, arms crossed, watching Gianni with undisguised contempt. Gianni saw his mother and dropped to his knees immediately, both knees hitting the grass as his body collapsed in front of her. Mama, he said, his voice breaking on the first word. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mama. I did the most horrible thing in the world. I took the money Sal sent you. I sold your house. I left you on the street and never looked back. There's no excuse. Margaret looked down at her kneeling son. Her face held no anger, no coldness, only pain. The deep pain of a mother watching her child destroy himself. Why, Gianni? She asked, her voice gentle but each word heavy as lead. I loved you. I raised you. I never hurt you. So why did you hurt me like this? Gianni looked up, tears streaming down his face. Because I was weak, Mama. Because I was bitter. Every day I watched you sit by the door waiting for Sal. You talked about him like he was a hero. Sal is so smart. Sal is so strong. Sal will come back. Every day you said it, and I was sitting right there beside you. I never left. I was there every day, but you never looked at me the way you looked at him. He left and he was a hero. I stayed and I was nothing. Margaret closed her eyes, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. I love both of you the same, she said, her voice trembling. Never doubt that, Gianni. I missed Sal because he wasn't here, but that didn't mean I loved you less. You were my comfort. You were my companion. You were the son who stayed, and you threw it all away. You took everything and left me alone. Do you know how many nights I slept in the cold? How many times I went hungry? How many times I was robbed, shoved, treated like trash? All while you lived in a luxury apartment with my money. Gianni bowed his head to the grass, his whole body shaking as he cried silently, his shoulders jerking. Margaret looked at her son, then reached out and gently touched his head, just like when he was little, just like when he'd fallen and she'd soothed him. Gianni looked up at the feel of her hand. I don't hate you, she said. I wish I could. It would be easier. But I can't hate my own child. What you did was cruel, selfish, wrong. But you're still my son, and I still love you, because that's what I do. Gianni couldn't speak. He just cried. Margaret withdrew her hand. But love alone isn't enough anymore, she said, her voice hardening. You have to change, Gianni. You have to become a better man. Because if you ever do this again, if you betray me or anyone else again, I won't forgive you a second time. Do you understand? I understand, Gianni whispered. I'll change. I swear I'll change. I'll use every day I have left to prove it to you. Margaret didn't answer. She simply closed her eyes. Time will answer, she said. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. Now go. I'm tired. I need to rest. Gianni stood slowly. Thank you, Mama, he said. Thank you for not turning me away. She didn't open her eyes. Sal had been standing by the glass door watching the garden the entire time, hearing every word. When Gianni stepped back inside, Sal blocked his path. That's all you get, he said. One chance. Don't waste it. Gianni nodded and left without looking back. Sal watched him go. He didn't know if his brother would truly change, but his mother had given him hope. And maybe that was enough. Or maybe Gianni would disappoint them all again. Only time would answer. Thea stood leaning against the trunk of the maple tree through the entire exchange between Gianni and Margaret. She heard every word. She watched him drop to his knees and cry. She watched Margaret place her hand on his head, and she couldn't understand it. After Gianni left, Thea helped Margaret back inside. Margaret sat on the sofa in the living room. Thea draped a blanket over her legs, poured her a glass of warm water, then sat beside her. She was quiet for a moment before she asked, Mama Maggie, how do you do it? Margaret looked at her. Do what, my girl? Forgive him, Thea said. He stole your money. He sold your house. He put you on the street. You almost died because of him, and you just touched his head like nothing happened. How can you do that? Margaret took a sip of water and set the glass down slowly. Because if I hold on to hatred, she said, it doesn't destroy Gianni, it destroys me. I lived on the street long enough to learn that. The coldest nights aren't winter nights. They're the nights I lay awake thinking about what Gianni did and felt hatred burning in my chest. Hatred kept me awake. Hatred ate me from the inside. It didn't keep Gianni up. It kept me up, so I let go. She looked at Thea. Not because Gianni deserves it, but because I deserve peace. Thea looked at her. My father was an alcoholic, she said quietly, not looking at Margaret but at her own hands. He beat me. My mother left when I was 6 and never looked back. My father died when I was 10. I went into foster care and got beaten there too. I aged out at 18. No one ever forgave me for anything. No one ever apologized to me for anything. I don't know what forgiveness is. I only know how to hold on, hold everything in my chest until it gets so heavy I can't breathe. Margaret placed her hand over Thea's. That's why you're so strong, she said. And that's why you're so tired. Thea looked at her, her eyes red, her lips pressed tight, fighting it the way she'd fought everything in her life, with willpower, with hardness, with the wall she'd built around herself since she was 6. But Margaret looked at her in a way no one ever had, eyes without pity, without judgment, only love, and the wall collapsed. Thea cried silently, tears sliding down her thin cheeks and falling onto Margaret's hand. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't turn her face. She just sat there and cried for the first time in years. The first time since she was a 9-year-old girl carried out of her house by a teenage boy on a winter night. Margaret pulled her into her arms, and Thea rested her head against her shoulder, and Margaret held her like the daughter she'd never had. Sal stood in the hallway and saw it through the open doorway. Thea crying in his mother's arms, the girl who'd fought 3 drunk men to protect an old woman, who'd gone hungry for months, who'd stood between 5 men in black suits without shaking. That girl was crying, and something cracked open in Sal's chest. He turned away, went down to the kitchen, leaned against the stone counter, and closed his eyes. He didn't understand this feeling. He knew how to deal with enemies, how to negotiate hundreds of millions of dollars, how to make people afraid. But he didn't know how to face the tears of that girl. That afternoon, after Thea had gone upstairs to rest, Margaret asked Sal to sit beside her. Salvatore, she said, listen to me. That girl took care of me when my own sons didn't. She starved so I could eat. She got beaten so I wouldn't be touched. She's the reason I'm sitting here alive today. Margaret looked at him. Don't let her leave. Mama, Sal said, you don't know the life I live. No one near me is safe. She took his hand. I know enough, she said. I know how she looks at you, and I know how you look at her. Don't let her leave, Salvatore. She carried me through my darkest days. Now it's your turn. Sal didn't get a chance to answer. His phone vibrated. Tommy. He picked up. Boss, Tommy said, his voice urgent in a way it rarely was. We've got a problem. Castellano's people know you canceled the port deal. They're watching this moment. They know you're distracted. My source says they're planning something. I don't have details yet, but I don't like what I'm hearing. Sal tightened his grip on the phone. Triple security at the house, he said. More men at the gate, more patrols. Rotate shifts every 8 hours. And Tommy, no one leaves this house without an escort. No one. Understood, boss. Sal ended the call and looked at his mother on the sofa, then up the stairs where Thea was resting above, the only 2 women who made his heart beat, both inside his house, at the center of the underworld, right in the middle of enemy territory. One evening, a few weeks later, Sal sat with his mother in the garden. Margaret was much stronger now. Dr. Patterson's medication, regular meals, and warm sleep had brought color back to her cheeks and light back to her eyes. Yet every night, when she thought no one was watching, she still stared into the distance with that faraway look, and Sal knew exactly what she was thinking about. The lost years, the nights on the street, the wounds that would never fully heal. Mama, Sal said, I want to ask you something. She looked at him. I want to build a place, he said. A place for people like you. Elderly people with no family. People abandoned by their children. People living on the street that no one cares about. A place with warm beds, hot food, medicine, doctors. A place where no one has to beg. Margaret looked at him in silence. Sal went on, and I want you to help me run it. She blinked. Me, she said. I'm just an old woman. What do I know about running anything? You know everything, Sal said. You know what it feels like to have nothing. You know what it feels like to be forgotten. You know what those people need because you've been exactly where they are. No one understands them better than you. Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she smiled. The first real smile since Sal had found her under the bridge. Not a big smile, just the corner of her mouth lifting. But it was real. Then do it, she said. We'll help people like me. The forgotten ones. The ones who have no one. We'll give them hope. We'll show them they matter. Sal started immediately. He bought an old 4-story building in the West Loop in downtown Chicago. A former factory that had been abandoned for years but was solid. He hired crews to renovate it, repaint it, install heating, add elevators for the elderly. Margaret came every day, and Thea went with her. They walked through each room choosing paint colors, beds, curtains, tables, chairs. Margaret wanted everything warm and soft, like a home. Not a hospital, not a shelter, but a home. Because that was what these people lacked. A place they could call their own. Thea handled the practical side, calculating how many beds per floor, how many bathrooms, how large the kitchen needed to be. She knew what homeless people needed, because she'd been one of them. She knew they needed personal lockers because belongings got stolen constantly on the street. She knew they needed bathrooms with locks because privacy was the rarest luxury when you lived outside. She knew they needed a quiet place to cry where no one could see them. Gianni came to help too. At first Sal didn't want him there, but Margaret insisted. He needs a purpose, she said. He needs to do something good, so Sal allowed it. Gianni did the hardest work, hauling bricks, pulling wires, painting walls, scrubbing floors. He didn't complain or demand anything. He arrived before sunrise and left after dark, and Sal began to see something changing in his brother. The bitterness wasn't gone, but it was fading. Behind the freshly painted walls, Sal installed security systems no one could see, cameras hidden in light fixtures, motion sensors at every entrance, bulletproof glass on the first floor, emergency alarms in every room, an escape tunnel from the basement leading to the alley behind the building. Tommy oversaw everything. 2 guards on duty, 24/7 disguised as maintenance workers. On the outside, it was a charity center. On the inside, it was a fortress. Margaret didn't know. Thea did. She saw Tommy checking cameras every morning. She saw the 2 men in maintenance uniforms wearing tactical boots with bulges at their hips. She said nothing. She understood. In Sal's world, this was how he loved. Not with flowers or sweet words, but with bulletproof glass and escape routes. During the construction days, Sal and Thea often worked side by side. He carried supplies. She organized. He measured. She took notes. They didn't talk much, but they stayed close. Once, Sal handed her a box of nails and their fingers brushed for a second, skin against skin, and both of them pulled back without a word. But Sal felt the heat where they'd touched for hours afterward, and he saw Thea turn away, hiding her face, her ears red. One night, Sal was in his office, reviewing blueprints, when he heard a scream from upstairs. He ran up. It came from Thea's room. He opened the door. She was thrashing on the bed, eyes shut tight, body jerking, mouth crying out wordless sounds. A nightmare. Sal stepped to the bed, but didn't touch her. He knew better than to grab someone having a nightmare, especially someone who'd been abused. He sat down on the floor beside the bed, back against the frame, and spoke softly. "Thea, easy. Thea, you're safe. No one can hurt you." He repeated it, low, steady, slow, like water flowing over stone. Thea stopped screaming. Her body gradually relaxed. Her breathing slowed. She didn't wake. She just sank deeper into sleep, this time without the nightmare. Sal stayed on the floor, back against the bed, and didn't leave. He sat there all night, listening to her even breaths, standing guard while she slept. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago sat on a cold floor watching over the sleep of a homeless girl. The next morning, Thea woke up, looked down, and saw Sal sitting there, eyes closed, head resting against the bed frame, asleep where he'd been sitting. She watched him for a long moment, then pulled the blanket from the bed and gently draped it over his shoulders. No one mentioned it. Not that day, not the week after, but both of them knew. 3 months later, Mama's house opened its doors. Margaret chose the name herself, not something elegant or charitable, just Mama's house, because that was what the place was meant to be, a home. On the first day, 10 people came. They stood at the entrance, hesitant and frightened, afraid to step inside. Margaret welcomed each of them, took their hands, looked them in the eyes, told them her name, and asked for theirs. She showed them their rooms, their beds, the lockers with their own keys, the bathrooms with doors that locked, and she told each of them the same thing. "This is your home. You're safe now." Within a week, 30 people were calling Mama's house home. They had warm beds, hot meals, medicine. But more than anything, they had dignity. They had someone who cared. One day, a woman stood at the door, Ruth. She was 55 but looked 70. Hollow cheeks, empty eyes, clutching a plastic bag that held everything she owned. She didn't dare step inside. Margaret went to her and asked gently what her name was. "Ruth," she whispered. "Come in, Ruth," Margaret said, taking her hand. And Ruth began to cry, saying her children had thrown her out, told her she was too old, too useless, took the house, and left her on the street. Margaret pulled her into an embrace and said she understood, that the same thing had happened to her. But Ruth wasn't useless, and she wasn't alone anymore, and that they would take care of her here. Ruth stayed, and like the others, she slowly came back to life. Gianni worked at the center every day, serving meals, cleaning, fixing things, listening to everyone's stories, each one reminding him of what he'd done to his mother. One of the residents was Walter, 68, a former university professor whose wife had taken her own life after their 2 children died in a car accident. He'd lost his home, his job, everything, and lived on the streets for 3 years. Walter and Gianni became friends, sitting in the yard every afternoon talking. And one day Walter asked Gianni why he worked there with sadness always in his eyes. Gianni told him everything, about the stolen money, the sold house, his mother on the streets. Walter listened, silent for a long time, then said Gianni didn't forgive himself, that he carried it and let it turn him into someone kinder, someone who felt pain and compassion, and that was how he paid for it, not by forgetting, but by remembering and living differently. Gianni said nothing, just nodded, and from that day on he worked harder, with more care and patience. Thea ran the center every day. She knew what was needed, what was missing, who required special care, running everything on the instincts of someone who'd lived exactly what the residents were living. One afternoon, after things had settled, Thea found Sal in his first-floor office and told him she was leaving. Sal looked up and asked where she was going. "Away from here," she said. The center was running fine. Maggie had people to care for her. She didn't need Thea anymore, and it was time for her to go. Sal stood, walked around the desk until he was in front of her. Closer than usual, close enough that she had to look up at him, and said one word, "Stay." Thea stepped back half a step and told him he knew how ridiculous that was, that he was a mafia boss and she was homeless, that she didn't belong in his world, in that house, in those armored SUVs, or in anything that belonged to him, and that this didn't end well. Sal looked at her and said nothing in his life had ever ended well, Not once, but he wanted to try. Something flickered in Thea's eyes, just for a moment. So fast it was almost invisible. Then it was gone. She turned and walked out without answering or looking back. Sal stood there staring at the empty doorway, not chasing after her, because he knew her, knew she needed time and space. I knew she'd taken care of herself her whole life, and the idea of leaning on someone terrified her more than any dark alley. That night, Tommy reported that Thea hadn't left the estate, that she'd gone to her room, closed the door, and skipped dinner. But she hadn't gone. Sal sat in his office, staring at the ceiling, where Thea's room was upstairs. She hadn't answered him, but she hadn't left. 2 weeks later, Thea went out to buy supplies for the center. She left with a bodyguard, as per Sal's rules. They drove to a home goods store in West Town. Thea went inside. The bodyguard stayed by the car. 15 minutes passed. 20, 30. The bodyguard went in to check. A store employee said the girl had gone out the back door about 5 minutes earlier. The back door led to an alley. The alley was empty. No Thea. No sign of her. Only her phone lying on the ground, the screen shattered. The bodyguard called Tommy. Tommy called Sal. Boss. Sal stood in his office with the phone to his ear as the blood drained from his face. Who took her? Not sure yet, but I think it's Castellano. 40 minutes later, Sal's phone rang again. An unknown number. He answered. The man's voice was calm, almost polite. Mr. Ferraro, we have your girl. She's intact. For now, we want the port deal. You step out. We step in. Simple. You have 24 hours. If not, we'll send her back to you. Piece by piece, the line went dead. Sal set the phone down on the desk, slowly, carefully. Then everything inside him went dark. The rage with Gianni had been the anger of a son. The rage when he flipped the table had been the anger of a betrayed brother. This was different. This was cold, still, dead. This was the monster Sal had fed for 18 years in the underworld. The monster his mother had never seen. The monster Thea had sensed but never faced. Now it was awake. Sal called Tommy. Mobilize everyone. Every man. Every contact. Every person who owes us. I want to know where she is before sunrise. Tommy activated the entire network, calling every source, every set of eyes in every dark corner of Chicago. Sal didn't sit and wait in a car. He went out himself. The bar where Castellano's people liked to drink. He walked in with 2 guards behind him and asked one question. Where is the girl? No one answered. Sal nodded to Tommy. Tommy dragged the manager into the back room. 5 minutes later, Tommy came out wiping his hands on a towel and said there was a warehouse in Cicero Castellano had rented last month. They moved on to the next place, a front restaurant run by Castellano's crew. Same question, same result. Everywhere Sal went, he left behind men who would never forget this night. 2 in the morning, Tommy confirmed it. An old warehouse on the outskirts of Cicero, 30 minutes from downtown Chicago, at least 8 guards. Sal didn't wait. 4 SUVs tore through the night with 12 armed men. Sal sat in the front seat beside Tommy, staring into the darkness, silent. They stopped 200 meters from the warehouse. Tommy deployed the men, 4 around the back, 4 on the sides. Sal and Tommy straight ahead. The first shot rang out when a guard spotted movement. Then chaos. Gunfire ripping through the night. Glass shattering. Screams. Bodies hitting concrete. Sal stepped through the front door, one hand on his gun, the other shoving open the rusted steel. A guard inside raised his weapon. Sal fired first. The man dropped. Sal stepped over him without looking down, without hesitation, moving deeper into the dark warehouse, following the sounds ahead. Another man came from behind a concrete pillar. Tommy dropped him before he could pull the trigger. They pushed forward to the last room. A steel door locked from the outside. Sal shot the lock and kicked it open, and he saw her. Thea sat on the concrete floor, hands bound behind her with plastic ties, mouth taped shut. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut, dried blood at the corner of her mouth, her shirt torn at the shoulder. But her eyes, the way she looked at him when he stepped through the door, no fear, no begging, no tears. Fierce, still fierce, like the day she stood in front of his mother under the bridge, angry not at them for taking her, but at herself for being taken. Sal dropped to his knees, pulled a folding knife, cut the ties around her wrists. Her wrists were swollen, bruised, skin broken where the plastic had bitten in. He peeled the tape from her mouth slowly, gently, gentler than almost anything he'd ever done. Thea drew a deep breath and looked at him. "I didn't need you to save me," she said, her voice hoarse and cracked but hard. Sal met her gaze. "I know," he said, "but I needed to save you." Something in her cracked then, not completely, but enough for her to fall into him. Sal wrapped his arms around her and held her tight. In a warehouse soaked in blood and shell casings, in the smell of gunpowder and cold concrete, a mafia boss held a homeless girl. No kiss, no confession, just two broken people clinging to each other in the wreckage. Thea didn't cry. She rested her head against his shoulder and breathed, and for the first time since they took her, she allowed herself to breathe. Sal brought Thea back to the mansion just before 4 a.m. Dr. Patterson was already waiting and examined her right there in the living room, bruising on her face, swelling around one eye, scraped wrists from the restraints, 2 small cuts on her shoulder and arm, but no broken bones and no internal injuries. "She's strong," the doctor said. "Physically, she'll recover in a few weeks. Mentally, I can't say." Sal nodded. Margaret hadn't slept all night. She'd sat on the living room sofa since Tommy called to say Thea had been taken. No one could persuade her to go to bed. She stayed there clutching her rosary, whispering prayers, her tired eyes fixed on the front door. And when it finally opened, and Thea stepped inside, she stood, walked toward her on trembling legs, studied the bruised face, the bandaged wrists, the exhausted but still burning eyes, and then she wrapped her in her arms. "My daughter," she said, her voice breaking. "My daughter, don't be afraid. I'm here." And Thea froze for a second in that embrace, before letting herself soften, resting her chin on Margaret's shoulder and closing her eyes. Because no one had ever called her daughter before. Her mother had left when she was 6 and never come back. And no one had used that word for her in the 21 years since. Not until now. Not until this 63-year-old woman. And Sal stood there watching them, and knew with brutal clarity that he had to leave the underworld. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. Because next time his enemies wouldn't kidnap Thea. They'd kill her, or kill his mother, or both. And he wouldn't survive that. So the next morning he called Tommy into his office and shut the door and said he was getting out completely, handing everything over. And Tommy studied him for a long moment, because he'd known this was coming ever since Sal had pulled his mother from beneath that bridge. "You know what that means," Tommy said. "Nobody walks away from an empire without paying for it." Sal nodded and said he knew, but he was doing it anyway, and wanted Tommy to take his place. And after a long silence, Tommy agreed, but warned it had to be slow, or people would grow suspicious and strike, before Sal could disappear. And Sal understood, and began inch by inch, transferring shipping routes, police connections, political contacts, front businesses, while Frank Bellini started laundering money into legitimate assets, commercial real estate, construction shares, investment funds. Every dirty dollar washed through 3 or 4 layers of clean transactions over months filled with danger, nights when Tommy called at 2 a.m. saying someone was asking questions, weeks when Sal had to attend meetings pretending nothing was wrong, hours sitting across from men he knew would kill him if they sensed the truth. And every time he hesitated, he pictured Thea's bruised face and his mother's tired eyes and kept going. Until one night, weeks after the kidnapping, he sat alone in the garden at 1 a.m, after a tense call with an associate who'd started probing too hard, staring up at a starless sky beneath the maple tree when he heard soft footsteps in the grass, and Thea sat beside him without asking anything. They stayed quiet until she whispered that she'd dreamed about the warehouse, and he turned to see moonlight on half her face, and tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away or look aside, just let them fall as if she was too tired to pretend she was strong anymore, and Sal lifted his hand slowly and gently brushed a tear from her cheek, her skin warm beneath his fingers, and she didn't pull back, only closed her eyes and leaned into his touch, like a flower tilting toward light. He wiped another tear and another, and then she opened her eyes and met his, and their lips touched, not fierce or hungry but trembling and soft, a kiss that hovered on the edge of breaking, lasting 3 seconds or 3 hours he couldn't tell. And when they parted, she said nothing, just rested her head on his shoulder while he laid his hand on her hair, and they stayed there in the garden, under the December moon, among wet grass and cold air, 2 broken people leaning into each other, while upstairs Margaret watched from her window, smiled quietly, drew the curtains, and for the first time in a very long while slept well. 6 months passed, and Mama's house was running steadily. 46 residents now calling it home. And Margaret came to the center every day, despite Dr. Patterson urging her to rest, because she said rest was for when a mother was dead, and as long as she was alive, she would keep working. And that morning, she was sitting in the dining room with Ruth and Walter, smiling as Ruth told some light-hearted story from her youth, Margaret lifting her teacup toward her lips before stopping halfway as her hand began to shake, the cup slipping from her fingers and spilling across the table, Ruth looking at her in alarm and calling her name just as Margaret pressed a hand to her chest, her face draining of color, and then she collapsed forward, sliding from her chair and hitting the floor. Ruth screaming as Walter rushed to her side, Gianni hearing the shout from the kitchen and running out to see his mother lying motionless on the floor, her eyes closed and her face white as paper, yelling for an ambulance as paramedics arrived 9 minutes later, lifting her onto a gurney, fitting an oxygen mask and starting an IV, Gianni climbing into the ambulance with her and gripping her hand with panic in his eyes as he called Sal on the way to Northwestern Memorial, his voice breaking as he said their mother had fallen at the center and was on the way to the hospital, and Sal needed to come now. Sal standing up in the middle of a transfer meeting with Tommy and walking out without a word, Tommy understanding immediately and driving him straight there, Thea hearing from Ruth and hailing a taxi, arriving 20 minutes after Sal, the emergency physician meeting Sal and Gianni in the hallway with a grave expression and explaining that their mother was in acute heart failure, her heart badly damaged by years of malnutrition, untreated infections, and prolonged stress, that they were stabilizing her, but the next 24 hours would decide everything, that if she made it through the night, she had a chance, and if not, they were sorry. Sal, staring at the doctor with hollow eyes, having heard bad news countless times in his life, but never anything that made the ground disappear beneath his feet like this. Gianni collapsing into a plastic chair and burying his face in his hands, saying it was his fault, because if he hadn't driven her into the streets, she wouldn't have spent those years suffering, and her heart wouldn't be like this, saying he had killed her. Sal looking down at his brother and wanting to agree, wanting to say, yes, it's your fault, but seeing that Gianni's eyes were different now, no bitterness or selfishness left, only the raw fear of losing their mother, and Sal telling him she wasn't dead yet, that she was fighting and they had to be strong for her. And they waited through 1 hour, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, Gianni sitting motionless and staring at the wall, while Sal stood by the window looking out over the Chicago night, and then he did something he hadn't done in 18 years, and prayed, not in a church or on his knees, but standing by the window with his hands clenched and his eyes closed, whispering that he didn't deserve to ask for anything, and knew who he was and what he had done, but that she deserved to live, that she had done nothing wrong, and asking God to let her live, promising he was changing, and would leave the underworld and live right, if only she could live. And 7 hours after she'd been admitted, the doctor came out to say she was awake. Sal and Gianni rushing into the room to find Margaret lying amid machines and tubes with an oxygen mask on her face, looking small among the equipment, but with her eyes open, and when she saw her sons, she tried to smile and lifted her hand to pull the mask down, the doctor stepping forward, but Sal signaling to let her speak, as she said in a weak voice that life was short, and she'd wasted too many years, lonely, sad, and angry, but that the past few months with her sons and Thea had been the happiest days of her life, telling them not to waste time or hold on to hatred, and to love each other, and promise her. Sal saying they promised, and Gianni nodding through tears, Margaret looking around the room and asking where Thea was, Sal glancing through the glass into the hallway where Thea sat alone at the far end on a plastic chair with her knees drawn up and her eyes on the floor, staying out because she thought she wasn't family, and this moment belonged to the two sons, and because a lifetime of never belonging had taught her to push herself aside, Sal going out to her and gently telling her that their mother was asking for her and to come in. Thea starting to protest before Sal took her hand and pulled her to her feet, telling her to come because their mother needed her. And when Thea entered the room, Margaret saw her and reached out, taking her hand and telling her she was the daughter she'd never had, that she'd cared for her when even her own sons hadn't been able to, and never to think she wasn't family, because she was family, and always would be. And Thea biting her lip and squeezing Margaret's hand as tears fell onto the white sheets, unable to speak but not needing to, because Margaret already knew. That night, Thea went back to the mansion to rest at Sal's insistence, while Gianni and Sal stayed at the hospital. Margaret was already asleep, the monitor beside her bed beeping steadily, green lights blinking softly in the darkness. The two brothers sat in the waiting area at the far end of the hallway, the vending machine humming in the corner, pale, fluorescent lights washing over their exhausted faces. Gianni leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor, silent for a long time before he finally spoke, without looking up, and asked if Sal could forgive him. Sal sat against the wall, head tilted back, eyes on the ceiling, not answering right away as he thought of his mother on the streets, her swollen feet, her hands stretched out begging for coins, the freezing nights, the times she had been robbed, all because of Gianni. And then he thought of his mother in a hospital bed, her damaged heart, years of malnutrition, all because of Gianni. "I'm trying," Sal said, his voice honest, not cold, not angry, just true. "Every time I think about Mom on the streets because of you, I want to hate you. I want to hate you down to the bone, but Mom loves you and she wants us to be brothers. So I'm trying. For her, not for you." Gianni nodded and didn't ask for more because he understood that was more than he deserved. "I won't waste this chance," Gianni said quietly. "I swear to you, I'll use every day I have left to prove it." Sal didn't reply. He just stared out the window at the city lights flickering in the night. The two brothers sat there until morning, without saying anything else. But for the first time in 18 years, they sat together without an invisible wall between them. Margaret survived the first critical night, then the second, then the third, and every morning the doctor came in, checked her, and nodded as she grew more stable and slowly but surely began to recover. She stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks, and during those 2 weeks, her room was never empty as residents from Mama's house came every day. Ruth bringing flowers cut from the small garden she tended behind the center. Walter bringing books to read aloud because Margaret's eyes were too weak for small print. Others bringing cards, fruit, and prayers, until the room filled with flowers and cards so completely that nurses had to move them into the hallway. Margaret looked at those faces, people she had met only months earlier but who had become family, smiling at each one, holding each hand, thanking each person, and every time a new resident came to visit, she asked the same questions. Whether the center was doing well, whether everyone was eating enough, whether the beds were warm enough. Gianni took over running Mama's house while she was hospitalized, and he did so well that Sal was surprised, arriving at the center at 6 in the morning and leaving at 10 at night, cooking, cleaning, fixing broken pipes in the middle of the night, sitting with Ruth while she cried about missing her children, playing chess with Walter every evening, remembering every resident's name, what they liked to eat and drink, which room they slept in, working as if every hour there were another brick rebuilding the man he had destroyed. Margaret was discharged with strict orders to rest. Sal hired a private nurse to care for her at home, and she promised she would rest, a promise that lasted exactly 3 days, because on the 4th day she demanded to go back to the center. Sal said no. She looked at him with eyes he couldn't argue with, told him those people needed her and she needed them. And Sal gave in, letting her go to the original center every day for just a few hours to sit in the common room, talk with residents, hold their hands, and listen to their stories while the nurse followed her like a shadow. 1 month after her discharge, Sal received a call from Mr. Hartwell, a representative of the investor group behind the port deal Sal had walked away from, who told him plainly that they had been watching Mama's house since it opened, that when Sal left the port project they thought he was crazy but they were wrong, that he had found something more valuable than money, and they wanted to be part of it by investing to expand Mama's house to more cities and more centers. Sal asked his mother, who sat quietly thinking for a long time before saying that if they could help more people then they had to do it, because every person on the streets was another Maggie, and everyone deserved a home. 5 new centers opened over the next 2 years in Detroit, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, St. Louis, and Minneapolis, each called Mama's House, and each run according to the way Margaret had established, not as a shelter but as a home. Gianni managed the operations, traveling to every new center to train staff and set up procedures, turning regret into energy and guilt into action. Because Walter had been right that Gianni didn't forgive himself, he carried it and let it make him kinder and more compassionate. Hundreds of elderly people found homes, hundreds of sad stories found warm endings, and at the original center in Chicago, every morning, Margaret Ferraro, at 64 years old, still sat in the common room with a cup of tea in her hand and a smile on her face, talking to everyone as if they were family, while doctors told her she should rest. Sal told her she should rest. Gianni told her she should rest. Thea told her she should rest, and she just laughed and said she would rest when no one needed her anymore. And that day hadn't come yet. 3 years passed. 12 Mama's House centers were operating across 8 cities, serving hundreds of residents, employing dozens of staff, and changing thousands of lives. Sal had almost completely withdrawn from the underworld, with Tommy taking control, and most of Sal's assets had been legalized so that he was no longer a boss but a businessman, at least on paper. Gianni ran the entire network of centers. Thea managed the original center in Chicago, and Margaret, now 66 years old, still came every morning, still sat in the common room, still held each person's hand, still said the line she always said, that love costs nothing but it changes everything. Her health was slowly failing and everyone could see it, as she walked more slowly, breathed harder on the stairs, and had to rest midway when moving from one room to another. Yet she smiled more than ever, smiling every day when Ruth showed off a painting she had made herself, when Walter read poetry aloud to everyone, when she saw Gianni holding a resident's small grandchild, when she watched Sal and Thea sitting side by side with their shoulders touching in quiet peace. One March morning, the nurse came to Margaret's room at 7 as she did every day, and found her lying in bed with the blanket pulled to her chest, her head turned slightly on the pillow, her eyes closed, her face calm, with no pain or strain, as if she were asleep. The nurse called her name, but there was no response, checked her pulse and felt nothing, then placed a hand on her chest and felt no heartbeat. Margaret Ferraro had passed away in her sleep, without pain, without fear, without loneliness, in a warm bed, in her son's home, surrounded by people who loved her. She had lived 66 years, many of them filled with hardship, but the final 3 years, the 3 years since her son had knelt beneath the bridge and called her mama, were the happiest years of her life. Sal received the call from the nurse at 7:15 while he was making coffee in the kitchen as Thea sat at the Island Reading Center reports. And when the phone rang, he answered, listened, then slowly set it down on the counter while the coffee continued to pour into the cup. Thea looked up at him, and although Sal's face did not change and showed no expression or movement, his eyes were dead. She said his name, but he did not answer, instead walking out of the kitchen and up the stairs, step by step like a sleepwalker, until he reached his mother's room, opened the door, and saw her lying there as if asleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand, which was cold, and then Sal cried, not as a boss, not as a guilty son, but as a child who had lost his mother, his shoulders shaking, his whole body trembling as he collapsed onto her hand and wailed, the sound echoing through the quiet mansion. Tommy heard it from downstairs and closed his eyes. Thea ran upstairs, stopped at the doorway, saw Sal folded over beside his mother's bed, and understood, covering her mouth before going to him, sitting beside him, and placing a hand on his back without saying a word, simply staying there. Gianni received the news 20 minutes later, while he was at the center preparing breakfast for residents, and when his phone rang, and he heard Sal say that their mother was gone, he dropped the plate in his hands and it shattered on the floor as Ruth stared at him. Walter stared at him, and the entire dining room went silent. Gianni ran outside, drove to the mansion, rushed upstairs, saw his mother on the bed, and collapsed beside her opposite Sal, the two brothers crying together for the woman who had given them life, loved them through every failure, forgiven when forgiveness was not required, and taught them that love costs nothing but changes everything. The funeral was held 5 days later, and thousands attended. Former and current residents from all 12 centers. Staff, volunteers, doctors, nurses, reporters, and strangers who had learned of her through the news, with the church overflowing so that people stood outside in the courtyard, on the sidewalk, and into the street, one by one rising to speak of how Margaret had changed their lives. Ruth said Margaret was the first person to hold her after her children threw her out. Walter said Margaret gave him a reason to keep living. Staff spoke of how she remembered every resident's name and every meal they loved. Then Thea stood and walked to the podium, holding a small piece of paper that she never looked at as she faced the crowd, and said that Maggie found her when she no longer wanted to live, when she was homeless, hungry, cold, and without a reason to wake up each morning, and that Maggie shared half a loaf of bread even when she herself was hungry. Asked her name when no one had asked it in years, and gave her a reason to wake up every day. She paused and said that Maggie taught her that family is not only blood but anyone who refuses to give up on you. That Maggie never gave up on her, never gave up on her sons, and never gave up on anyone who walked into Mama's house, and that she would never give up on what Maggie built. When Thea stepped down, the church was silent, then filled with crying, not from one person but from many, mourning the elderly woman who once begged on the streets and ultimately saved hundreds of lives. After the funeral, Gianni stood alone by his mother's grave long after everyone had left, staring down at the stone engraved with her name and the words she always said, that love costs nothing but it changes everything. And he spoke to her, saying that he would carry this regret for the rest of his life, that he would never forget or forgive himself, that he would remember every night she slept on the streets because of him until the day he died, and that he would use that pain to become a better man every single day until he met her again. The wind moved through the cemetery as maple leaves fell onto her grave, and when Gianni turned away, the shadow of guilt followed him, destined to remain with him forever, because every night when he closed his eyes, he still saw his mother's swollen bare feet on the freezing pavement, an image he would carry until the day he died. Sal and Gianni established a fund in their mother's name, the Mama Foundation, using all of Sal's legalized assets and Gianni's management skills to expand its reach, and within 5 years, 30 Mama's House centers rose across 15 cities throughout the United States, giving more than 5,000 elderly people a place to call home, and more than 5,000 sad stories a warm ending. Sal and Thea were married in the garden of the River North Mansion in a small wedding, attended only by family, Mama's House residents, Tommy, Ruth, and Walter, with Thea wearing a simple white dress and her hair loose, feeling for the first time in her life that she truly belonged somewhere and to someone. While Sal watched her walk across the green lawn where his mother used to sit every afternoon, and smiled a genuine smile, the smile of a man who had walked through darkness and finally seen the light. In every Mama's house across the country, right at the entrance, hangs a photograph of an elderly woman smiling, her face wrinkled yet beautiful, her eyes gentle yet strong, with the words she always said written beneath it, that love costs nothing but it changes everything. It all began with a single moment, when a mafia boss sitting in an armored SUV saw his mother begging among traffic on the streets of Chicago, a moment when he could have driven on, looked away, gone to his $100 million meeting and pretended he hadn't seen her. But he didn't. He stopped, turned around, searched for his mother, faced his shame, confronted his brother, knelt down to ask for forgiveness, and spent the rest of his life making things right. That moment changed everything, not just for him and not just for his family, but for thousands of people who would never have to beg, never have to sleep on the streets, and never have to wonder if anyone in the world still cared about them. This story reminds us all that sometimes the people we love most are the ones we hurt without meaning to. That money can never replace presence. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing to let go of the weight of hatred, so we ourselves can be free. And that family is not only blood, but anyone who refuses to give up on you. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with those you love, so together we can listen to more meaningful stories each day. And let us know how you feel about the story of Sal, Margaret, and Thea, and whether you've ever had a moment when you realized you had unintentionally neglected the most important person in your life, because we truly want to hear what's in your heart. We wish everyone watching good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days ahead. Goodbye and see you in the next video.